The November wind tasted of snow and pine, a scent Corbin Blackwood knew in his bones. It bit through the worn denim of his jacket as he steered the tribal ranger pickup along the frost. Rimmed access road. Old Man Tiber had called it Infividia Buck down on the far edge of the reservation. Near the boundary with the Kincaid Ranch, Poached Tiber had grumbled. Though the old rancher wouldn't he'd have cared if a bear took down a deer, so long as it wasn't T20 cattle. Corbin didn't share Tiber's laxity. Every deer lost to a poacher was a loss to the tribe, a chipped piece from a heritage already worn thin. He'd been on the force barely a year, fresh back from the state academy, and still felt the weight of proving himself, especially to his mother, and especially after everything the buck lay in a shallow draw. A dark stain blooming on the packed earth. It was a magnificent animal, a 10-point, its rack still covered in velvet stubs. Even in death, it held a regal bearing. Corbin killed the engine, the silence amplifying the wind's mournful song. He approached slowly, careful not to disturb anything. The rancher hadn't exaggerated. The deer was dead, all right? But it was the ragged panic kill you saw with typical poaching. No clumsy shot, no frantic thrashing. This was precise, almost surgical. Kneeling, Corbin examined the wound. A single, perfect shot, center mass, dropped the animal instantly. No hesitation, no follow-up, a professional hit. He ran a gloved hand along the edges of the wound. No splintered bone, no tearing. Like someone knew exactly where to place the bullet for maximum impact, minimal damage, clean. He muttered, too clean. Most poachers were kids with hunting rifles, and a reckless disregard for the law or out-of-state trophy hunters. This felt different, colder. He scanned the surrounding area. The ground was frozen hard, offering little in the way of tracks. A few scattered pine needles, some animal prints. Nothing definitive. He spotted a spent shell casing, carefully tucked into the base of a juniper bush, 7.62 times 51 millimeters. Military grade, not what you'd find in the cab of a pickup truck. A flicker of memory, Thaddeus' hands, rough and calloused, cleaning a rifle just like that. His father, a Marine, who brought the discipline of the Corps back to the reservation, trying to instill it in a boy who always felt more at home in the woods than in either world. The image dissolved, leaving a familiar ache. He hadn't spoken to his mother about his father in months. It was easier that way, easier to avoid the unspoken accusations, the lingering grief he left for the academy partly to escape it, to forge his own path away from the shadow of a man he both idolized and resented. He bagged the shell casing, careful to preserve any potential evidence. The Kincaid Ranch bordered the reservation on the north and west, a sprawling empire of cattle and resentment. Old Man Kincaid had been fighting the tribe's water rights for decades, claiming ancestral ownership of the creek that ran through their land. It was a classic story, daunty white landowners pushing against the boundaries of the reservation, always looking for an advantage. Corbin knew Kincaid would be the first suspect. The man had the means and the motive. But something felt off. This wasn't about water rights or trespassing. This felt personal. He pictured Councilman Gray Elk's face, stern and disapproving. Gray Elk was old school, distrustful of outsiders, and fiercely protective of tribal traditions. He made no secret of his reservations about Corbin, attending the state academy, dismissing it as going over to the other side. "You think you can learn to protect our ways from Siventimony?" Gray Elk had asked, his voice like granite. Corbin had argued that understanding the law, the system the ranchers and the state operated within, was the best way to fight for their rights. But the councilman hadn't been convinced. He wanted Corbin to follow in his grandfather's footsteps, a traditional tracker, learning the land through generations of accumulated knowledge. He'd chosen a different path, and now he had to prove it was the right one. A poached deer wasn't just a crime against the wildlife. It was a test of his loyalty, his competence. A setback would fuel Gray Elk's narrative, confirm his fears that Corbin was becoming disconnected from his heritage. He started a grid search, meticulously scanning the area for any other clues. The wind was picking up, swirling dead leaves around his boots. Dusk was settling, painting the landscape in shades of gray and purple. He needed to get this deer documented and reported before dark. That is when he saw it. Partially obscured by a drift of snow, carved into the trunk of a young aspen tree, was a symbol. It wasn't a ranch brand or a surveyor S-mark. It was a spiral, intersected by three parallel lines. The carving was crude, but deliberate. It stirred something deep within him, a half-forgotten memory surfacing from the recesses of his childhood. He remembered his grandmother, old Maggie, telling stories around the fire, tales of spirits and ancient protectors. She'd spoken of symbols like these, markings used in ceremonies long past, meant to appease the old gods of the forest. He dismissed them as folklore then, bedtime stories to scare children. But now, staring at the carved symbol, a chill ran down his spine. It wasn't just the cold of the November wind. This was something else, something ancient and unsettling, a connection to a past he thought he'd left behind, a past that, it seemed, hadn't forgotten him. He touched the rough bark around the carving, tracing the lines with his finger. The wood felt strangely warm. He didn't recognize the specific combination. But the spiral felt significant. He'd seen it in the beadwork of old Maggie's ceremonial vest, woven into the designs of ancient pottery shards unearthed during archaeological digs. This wasn't just poaching. This was a message, a warning, or something far worse. The symbol burned behind Corbin's eyelids, a swirling echo of a forgotten language. Back at the ranger station, the chipped formica of his desk felt cold under his elbows as he stared at the photograph he'd taken of the carving. He'd run it through every law enforcement database he could access to semi nothing. No match for known gang markings, vandalism tags, or even historical graffiti. He switched to academic databases, scouring articles on Lakota and Cheyenne symbolism. Hours blurred into a caffeine-fueled haze. Finally, a hit. A grainy image in a dusty online archive of archaeological reports. The symbol, or a close variant, appeared in illustrations depicting petroglyphs found near Bear Butte, a sacred site a few hours west of the reservation. The accompanying text spoke of Wakani and Tanka, the great thunderbirds, and their connection to ancestral burial grounds. The spiral, the report suggested, represented the cyclical nature of life and death, while the three lines signified the three worlds, the present world, and the sky world. The symbol was often found guarding entrances to sacred spaces, serving as a ward against unwanted spirits. A wave of unease washed over Corbin. This wasn't just some random act of vandalism. This was intentional, and it smacked of something old. He needed to talk to someone who understood the old ways, someone like Old Man Hemlock. Hemlock lived in a small, weathered cabin on the fringes of the tribal lands, a recluse known more for his herbal remedies and enigmatic pronouncements than for conversation. The air around his cabin smelled of sage and wood smoke. Hemlock, a wiry man with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom, barely acknowledged Corbin's presence as he brewed a bitter tea. The dear, Hemlock said, his voice raspy and slow without preamble. It was taken with purpose. Corbin showed him the photograph. Hemlock's gaze fixed on the image, his expression unreadable. He traced the symbol with a gnarled finger. A warning, he finally said. The stones, remember, they are waking, Corbin asked, trying to keep the skepticism from his voice. The old spirits disturbed. They do not take kindly to being disturbed. Hemlock's eyes met Corbin's, piercing and knowing. That mark, it hasn't been seen in a long time. It is a guardian, a seal, someone is tempting fate. Do you know who would do something like this? Hemlock shook his head. There are those who do not respect the old ways. Those who see only what they want to see: power, wealth. They do not understand the balance. Is there a specific site this symbol would protect? Hemlock hesitated, then pointed a trembling finger towards the west. Near Blackwood's land, there are places, forgotten places. The ancestors sleep there. Arthur Blackwood. The name tasted like ash in Corbin's mouth. Blackwood owned half the county, his empire built on timber cattle and a reputation for ruthlessly exploiting any opportunity. He'd been a thorn in the tribe's side for years, constantly challenging their land claims and water rights. Corbin knew Blackwood had a penchant for landscaping, Sabine bulldozing hills, rerouting streams, turning the natural terrain into manicured gardens. It wasn't uncommon for Blackwood to discover artifacts during these projects, dismissing them as Indian junk and promptly burying them again. He spent the next day discreetly observing Blackwood's property from a distance. The Blackwood Ranch was a fortress, a sprawling estate dominated by an ostentatious Victorian mansion. The perimeter was secured by high fences, security cameras, and no trespassing signs. He drove the access roads, pretending to be a lost tourist, cataloging the changes Blackwood had made to the landscape. What had once been rolling hills were now terraced gardens. A natural creek bed had been diverted into a decorative pond. It was clear Blackwood was trying to reshape the land to his own design. And in doing so, he was likely destroying something valuable. He found a subtle anomaly near the western edge of the property, a patch of disturbed earth hidden behind a dense row of newly planted conifers. The soil was darker, richer than the surrounding ground, and scattered with fragments of shale and pottery. He carefully collected a few samples, bagging them as evidence. He also noticed something else, a faint, almost imperceptible track leading into the woods, obscured by fallen leaves and carefully concealed by a layer of mulch. It wasn't a road or a path. It was as if someone was actively trying to hide something that evening. Fueled by lukewarm coffee and a growing sense of dread, Corbin decided to conduct a surveillance operation. He parked his pickup a mile from the ranch, camouflaged amongst the trees, and set up a pair of high-powered binoculars. He waited. Hours crawled by. The moon climbed high in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape. Just as he was about to call it a night, he saw it. A figure cloaked in darkness emerged from a service entrance near the mansion. It was difficult to make out details in the dim light, but the figure moved with a purposeful stride, carrying a large, rectangular object wrapped in heavy canvas. The figure didn't head towards the main house or the barns. It headed directly into the woods, following the hidden track Corbin had discovered earlier. He watched, his breath caught in his throat as the figure disappeared into a dense thicket of trees. He grabbed his radio, preparing to call for backup. But before he could speak, he saw something that froze him to the spot. The figure had reached its destination, a small, stone structure almost completely hidden by vegetation, a structure that wasn't on any of the ranch's blueprints or any county records, a structure that looked ancient. And as the figure struggled to maneuver the wrapped object through the narrow doorway, Corbin felt a cold certainty settle over him. Whatever was happening at Blackwood's ranch wasn't just about land or wealth. It was about something far more dangerous. It was about disturbing the stones and awakening something that should have remained sleeping. The air hung thick and damp as Corbin slipped through the undergrowth, adrenaline sharpening his senses. The structure was more substantial than it had appeared through the binoculars. Within a reinforced concrete bunker, cleverly concealed beneath a layer of earth and vegetation. The entrance, a steel door camouflaged with vines, was secured with an electronic lock. He bypassed it with a lockpick kit he'd thankfully remembered to bring, the tumblers clicking softly in the night. The door groaned open, revealing a narrow corridor that descended into darkness. He activated the flashlight on his weapon, the beam cutting through the gloom. The air inside was stale and smelled of dust and something else, something ancient and unsettling. The corridor opened into a vast cavernous space. Corbin swept the beam across the room, and his breath hitched in his throat. It wasn't a storage room. It was a museum, an illicit museum, filled with stolen treasures. Pottery shards from a dozen different tribes lined the shelves. Woven blankets, their colors faded with age, hung on the walls ceremonial masks. Their faces, grim and haunting, stared out from the shadows. He recognized artifacts from sites across the region too, in pieces that had been lost during construction projects, discovered by unscrupulous collectors. It was a systematic, decades-long plundering of Native American heritage. He moved deeper into the bunker, carefully documenting everything with his camera. There were display cases filled with obsidian arrowheads, turquoise jewelry, and intricately carved pipes. He even spotted a medicine bundle, its contents carefully preserved. This wasn't the work of a casual collector. This was the work of someone who understood the significance of these objects, someone who knew how to acquire them and conceal them. In the center of the room, a large oak desk stood beneath a single, harsh fluorescent light. On the desk, a leather-bound ledger lay open. Corbin's heart hammered against his ribs as he began to read. The ledger wasn't a catalog of artifacts. It was a record of transactions, payments, names. Arthur Blackwood's name appeared on almost every page, signing off on payments ranging from a few $1,000s to tens of thousands. But it wasn't just Blackwood. There were names he recognized: Councilman Gray Elk, the tribal judge, even a state senator. The entries were coded, using obscure references and veiled language. Project Thunderbird, Stone Guardian, Whispering Winds. But the meaning was clear. These weren't just donations, they were bribes. Quid pro quo for overlooking the illegal digs, turning a blind eye to the stolen artifacts. A network of corruption that reached into the heart of the tribe and beyond. Corbin felt a surge of nausea. Gray Elk. He'd always suspected the councilman was motivated by self-interest, but to be complicit in something like this, it was devastating. His father, a staunch advocate for tribal sovereignty, would have been appalled. He continued skimming through the ledger, his hands trembling. One entry caught his eye, a large payment to a K. Vance for the acquisition of a winged messenger. The date matched the approximate time frame of a missing stone bird WA sacred object, stolen from a burial ground near Bear Butte. He was so engrossed in the ledger that he almost didn't hear the sound. A metallic click, the heavy thud of boots on concrete. Well, a voice drawled from the doorway. Looks like we have a visitor. It was Brutus, Blackwood's head of security. A hulking man with a shaved head and eyes like chips of granite. Behind him stood two more of Blackwood's enforcers, their hands resting on the holsters of their sidearms. "You shouldn't be here," Brutus said, his voice dangerously calm. "I could say the same for you," Corbin replied, his hand instinctively reaching for his own weapon. "This isn't a negotiation. Just leave, and forget you ever saw anything." Corbin knew he was outnumbered, outgunned. He could try to fight, but it would be a losing battle. He needed to get out, get the evidence to someone who could expose this operation. "I think I'll take a souvenir," he said, grabbing a small, intricately carved stone bird from a nearby display case. It was no larger than his palm, but its wings were outstretched, as if in perpetual flight. "Don't be a fool," Brutus growled. Corbin didn't wait for a response. He spun around and sprinted towards the entrance, firing a warning shot over his shoulder. The security team returned fire, bullets ricocheting off the concrete walls. He dove behind a shelf, narrowly avoiding a spray of shattered pottery. He scrambled through the corridor, ignoring the stinging pain in his side. He burst out into the night. Sprinting through the woods, the stone bird clutched tightly in his hand. He could hear the security team pursuing him, their shouts echoing through the trees. He reached his pickup, fumbling with the keys. He slammed the truck into gear and peeled out, leaving a cloud of dust and gravel in his wake. He glanced in the rearview mirror, but the security team was nowhere in sight. He'd lost them for now. Back at the tribal police station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Corbin recounted his experience to Sergeant Two Trees, his supervisor. Two Trees listened in stony silence, his face grim. "Blackwood, Gray Elk," he muttered. "This is bad, Corbin. Very bad." Corbin placed the stone bird on Two Trees' desk. "I need to get this to the FBI. They have the resources to investigate this properly." Two Trees nodded. "I'll contact Agent Miller. He has been working on a case involving stolen artifacts." Agent Miller arrived an hour later, a tall, lean man with a weary expression. He examined the stone bird, turning it over in his hands. His eyes, a steely gray, narrowed with recognition. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice suddenly tight. "Blackwood's ranch," Corbin replied. "Inside a hidden bunker, he has been collecting stolen artifacts for years. The ledger implicates several prominent figures, including Councilman Gray Elk." Miller's gaze locked onto Corbin's, and a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. He wasn't surprised, not even a little. "This isn't just about stolen artifacts, is it?" Corbin asked, a growing sense of unease creeping into his voice. Miller didn't answer. He continued to stare at the stone bird, his expression growing increasingly troubled. He ran a finger along the bird's intricately carved wings, then looked up at Corbin, his eyes filled with a chilling realization. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," he said softly. This goes much deeper than you think. And then a pause. That bird. I've seen its like before. A long time ago, in a case I thought was long closed. Agent Miller's reaction hadn't sat right. The initial flicker of recognition, followed by that unsettling dismissal. Something was deeply wrong. He'd spent years learning to read people, a skill honed by necessity growing up on the reservation. Miller was a professional, a master of composure. But Corbin had seen the brief flash of something else, fear recognition, something hidden beneath the carefully constructed facade. He excused himself, claiming he needed to file a detailed report. As soon as he was alone, he accessed the National Law Enforcement database, running Miller's name, badge number, everything he could find. The results were incomplete. Agent Sarah Miller did exist, but the file was thin, lacking the depth of experience you'd expect from an FBI agent assigned to a case of this magnitude. Dates didn't align, previous assignments were unverifiable. Then he widened the search, querying alternative databases, focusing on aliases and covert operations. A hit, a grainy photograph, a past life. The woman sitting across from him wasn't Sarah Miller. She was Catherine Vance, a name he remembered from the Ledger K. Vance, the recipient of a large payment for the winged messenger. His gut twisted. Vance wasn't investigating the theft of the artifacts. She was protecting it. He dug deeper, unearthing old files on Vance's previous assignments. She specialized in art recovery, or rather, in suppressing investigations into art theft when powerful interests were involved. She was a cleaner, a fixer. She didn't solve crimes. She made them disappear. He needed to understand the significance of the stone bird. He returned to Old Man Hemlock, hoping the elder could shed some light on its origins. Hemlock examined the carving, his touch reverent. "This is awakened Tanka-kin," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "A sacred bird, a fragment of the Great Spirit is song." "What does that mean?" Corbin asked, his voice tight. "Legends say that long ago, the Lakota people possessed a complete wakened Tanka, a sculpture of immense power. It was said to hold the spirit of the ancestors, to protect the tribe from harm. It was broken into pieces, scattered across the land, to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. And this bird, it is one of those pieces." Hemlock nodded slowly. "One of the missing fragments, a key component, legend says. When all the pieces are rejoined, the wakened Tanka will awaken, restoring balance to the world. Or destroying it," Corbin finished, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Hemlock's gaze bore into him. "Power has a price, Corbin. It can be used for good or for evil, Blackwood. He seeks to control that power, to use it for his own ends." Then a fragmented memory surfaced, sharp and painful. His father sketching in his notebook, a charcoal rendering of a bird, remarkably similar to the one in his hand. His father, captivated by Lakota legends, spending hours researching the wakened Tanka. His father disappearing without a trace while investigating a series of artifact thefts near Bear Butte. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His father hadn't just stumbled onto a simple case of stolen relics. He'd been investigating something far more dangerous, something that had cost him his life. He remembered snippets of conversations, overhearing his father on the phone, speaking in hushed tones about a conspiracy, powerful people, a terrible secret. He dismissed it as paranoia then, the anxieties of a man haunted by his past. Now it all made sense. He rummaged through old boxes in his mother's attic, searching for his father's research notes. He found a worn, leather-bound journal filled with his father's meticulous handwriting. He flipped through the pages, his heart pounding in his chest. There it was, a detailed sketch of the wakened Tanka with annotations describing its significance, a map marking several sites across the region, including Blackwood's ranch, and a name, Catherine Vance. His father had been investigating Vance. He'd discovered her involvement in the artifact trade. He'd gotten too close. The phone rang, shattering the silence. Corbin hesitated before answering. The caller ID was blocked. "Corbin Blackwood," a raspy voice asked. "Who is this?" "I have information about your father," the voice said, cold and impersonal. "Information you've been looking for a long time." Corbin's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you want?" The voice replied. The stone bird, bring it to the old trading post north of town tonight, midnight. Come alone. Who are you working with? The voice chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound. That is not important. What is important is that you have a choice. The truth about your father, or a meaningless piece of stone. The line went dead. Corbin stared at the phone, his hand trembling. A trap. Most likely, but he had to take the chance. He needed to know what happened to his father. And he had a feeling that Catherine Vance and Arthur Blackwood held the answers. The Wakantanka wasn't just about stolen artifacts and ancient legends. It was about betrayal, conspiracy, and a past that refused to stay buried. And he, Corbin Blackwood, was caught in the middle, walking a path that led directly into the heart of darkness. The trading post was a ghost of its former self, a crumbling relic of a bygone era. Corbin hadn't gone there. It was a diversion. He'd anticipated the call, the demand. He'd laid his own trap, setting the stage for a confrontation at the archaeological dig site on Blackwood's property, Fuwine, the place where it all began. He disregarded the tribal council's warnings, their pleas for caution. They'd urged him to let the FBI handle it, to trust the system he knew better. The system was compromised. He was on his own. He arrived under the cover of a moonless night, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. He disabled the security cameras, bypassed the perimeter alarms. He positioned himself amongst the skeletal remains of a half-excavated burial mound, the stone bird cool against his skin. A pair of headlights pierced the darkness. Blackwood's SUV, followed by a sleek black sedan. Agent Miller was behind the wheel. Corbin's muscles coiled, his hand tightening around the grip of his weapon. Blackwood emerged from the SUV, his tailored suit incongruous against the rough terrain. Miller followed, her face impassive, a glint of steel in her eyes. She wasn't wearing her FBI badge. You shouldn't have come here. Blackwood, Corbin said, his voice low and steady. Blackwood smirked. Such bravado, Officer Blackwood. You really think you can stand against me against progress? This isn't about progress. It is about greed, about desecrating sacred land, stealing the heritage of my people. Miller stepped forward. Let's not be dramatic. We're simply reclaiming lost history, putting these artifacts in the hands of those who can appreciate them. Appreciate them. You're selling them to the highest bidder, Corbin countered, raising his voice. I have the ledger. I know what you're doing. Miller's facade cracked. You know too much, she said, her voice losing its professional veneer. And your father knew too much. The air crackled with tension. Corbin felt a cold dread wash over him. It all connected. Vance, Blackwood, his father's disappearance. What did you do to him? Blackwood laughed. Your father was a naive idealist. He thought he could stop us. He interfered with something he didn't understand. You killed him, Corbin accused, his voice trembling with rage. Let's just say he became an obstacle, a regrettable consequence. Blackwood's eyes gleamed with malice. We're on the cusp of something incredible, Corbin. This land, it isn't just about the relics we found. There is something more, something underneath all of this. The heart of the Wakantanka, an energy source unlike anything this world has ever seen. And you think you can control it? Corbin asked, scorn dripping from his voice. I prefer harness. Imagine the possibilities, limitless power. Blackwood glanced at Miller, a silent understanding passing between them. We're not desecrating anything. We're unlocking a potential that has been dormant for centuries. You're delusional, Corbin spat. You're playing with forces you don't understand. Enough talk, Miller said, drawing her weapon. Hand over the bird and maybe we'll let you walk away. Corbin didn't hesitate. He dove behind the crumbling remains of the burial mound, firing a shot that whizzed past Blackwood's ear. The night erupted in chaos. Gunfire tore through the air, shattering the silence. Corbin moved like a shadow, utilizing the terrain for cover, relying on the training his father had instilled in him. Blackwood's security team materialized from the darkness, their weapons trained on him. Corbin returned fire, taking down one of the guards with a well-aimed shot. He rolled, dodging a hail of bullets, feeling a searing pain in his shoulder. He'd been hit. He traded shots with Miller, the FBI agent, moving with a cold, calculated efficiency. She wasn't trying to capture him. She was trying to kill him. He realized with a chilling certainty that she'd been anticipating this, setting him up for an ambush. The fight was brutal, a desperate struggle for survival. Corbin used his knowledge of the terrain, his agility, and his raw determination to stay one step ahead of his attackers. He disarmed one of Blackwood's guards, using the man's own weapon against him. He dodged a blow from Blackwood, sending the rancher stumbling backwards. But he was outnumbered, outgunned, and wounded. He felt his strength waning, his movements becoming sluggish. Miller had him cornered, her weapon aimed directly at his chest. "It is over, Blackwood," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Give me the bird." Corbin braced himself for the inevitable. He closed his eyes, bracing for the impact, but it never came. Instead, a chorus of war cries shattered the night. A group of Lakota elders, their faces painted with ceremonial markings, emerged from the shadows, armed with rifles and ancient weapons. Leading them was Old Man Hemlock, his eyes burning with righteous fury. "You defile sacred ground," Hemlock roared, his voice echoing across the dig site. "You have awakened the spirits. Now you will face their wrath." The elders opened fire, forcing Blackwood's security team to retreat. Miller, momentarily stunned, found herself facing a barrage of gunfire. Corbin, wounded and exhausted, watched in disbelief as the tide of the battle turned. The protectors of the land had arrived, and they were ready to fight. The gunfire subsided, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Blackwood and Miller were subdued, disarmed, and secured by the Lakota elders, their faces grim with righteous anger. Corbin leaned against a partially excavated wall, his shoulder throbbing, exhaustion washing over him. Old Man Hemlock knelt beside him, applying a poultice of herbs to his wound. "You fought bravely, Corbin Blackwood," Hemlock said, his voice softer now. "Your father would be proud." The compliment felt hollow. Pride couldn't mend bones or erase the years of unanswered questions. Sirens wailed in the distance. The FBI was coming. Corbin didn't want them here. He didn't trust them. Not after what he'd learned about Agent Miller. "They'll try to take over," he said, his voice raspy. "Spin this to their advantage." "We need to control the narrative," Hemlock nodded. "The Tribal Council is already preparing a statement. We will cooperate with the investigation, but on sundry terms." When the FBI arrived, led by a stern-faced agent named Reynolds, they were met with a unified front. The Tribal Council, guided by Hemlock, insisted on overseeing the excavation, documenting the evidence, and conducting their own parallel investigation. Reynolds, clearly frustrated, reluctantly agreed, knowing he couldn't afford a public confrontation with the tribe. As the FBI agents began securing the site, Corbin, aided by two of the elders, returned to the area where he'd found the stone bird. He remembered a subtle irregularity in the stonework of the burial mound, a section that seemed out of place. He pressed against a seemingly solid stone, and with a soft click, a hidden compartment sprang open. Inside, nestled amongst layers of decaying cloth and dried herbs, was a small leather-bound journal. He recognized the handwriting instantly. His father's. His hands trembled as he opened the journal, the aged paper crackling beneath his touch. The first few entries were mundane asseverations of the dig site, notes on the artifacts he'd uncovered. But as he continued reading, the tone shifted. A growing sense of unease crept into his father's writing. He'd stumbled onto something big. He'd begun to suspect Blackwood was involved in more than just casual collecting. He'd uncovered evidence of a network of smugglers, dealers, and corrupt officials, all working to exploit the region's rich archaeological heritage. His father meticulously documented his investigation, detailing every conversation, every lead, every piece of evidence he'd gathered. He'd identified Catherine Vance as the key player, a shadowy figure who operated above the law, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. "Vance is dangerous," he'd written. "She has connections in high places. I fear I'm getting too close." The journal entries became increasingly frantic, filled with paranoia and a growing sense of dread. He'd discovered Blackwood's true motive to end, not just profit, but control. Control of the land, control of a hidden energy source, control of something far more ancient and powerful than he could have imagined. "Blackwood believes the Wakantanka is more than just a legend," his father wrote. "He thinks it is a source of immense power, a key to unlocking unimaginable potential. He is searching for the complete artifact, the heart of the Thunderbird, and I fear he is getting closer." Then, the entries stopped abruptly. The last entry was dated just days before his father's disappearance. "I've found something. A clue, a map. It leads to a hidden chamber deep within the Blackwood Ranch. I'm going to investigate if anything happens to me. Tell them it is not about the artifacts. It is about protecting the lineage, protecting the secret." Corbin's heart hammered against his ribs. Lineage secret. What did his father mean? He flipped through the remaining pages, hoping to find an answer. He discovered a detailed sketch of the hidden chamber, a subterranean vault located near an ancient spring on the Blackwood property. And beneath the sketch, a cryptic message. "The raven knows. Follow the song of the stone." He stared at the message, his mind racing. The raven, the song of the stone. What did it all mean? A chilling realization dawned on him. His father hadn't just been investigating the illegal artifact trade, he'd been protecting something. Something that had been passed down through generations of his family. A secret that Blackwood and Vance were desperate to uncover. And now, Corbin was the last line of defense. He was the one who had to protect the lineage. He was the one who had to unravel the mystery. He was the one who had to finish what his father had started. But he had a feeling his father's final words were a warning. This wasn't just about the past. It was about a threat that was still very much alive. The dust settled, both literally and figuratively. Arthur Blackwood and Catherine Vance, stripped of their illusions and their power, were taken into federal custody, facing a litany of charges to conspiracy, artifact smuggling, obstruction of justice. Reynolds, the FBI agent, grudgingly acknowledged the tribe's assistance. Though the subtext was clear, he still believed they'd been fortunate to have him oversee the operation. The artifacts, painstakingly cataloged and documented, were returned to the tribe. It was a solemn ceremony, held in the heart of the reservation, under the watchful gaze of the Black Hills. Each piece was treated with reverence, cleansed with sage, and placed in a newly constructed cultural center, a beacon of hope and renewal. The dig site was secured, fenced off, and placed under the protection of tribal rangers. Hemlock oversaw the restoration of the burial mound, ensuring the ancestors were once again at peace. The land began to heal, slowly recovering from the scars inflicted by Blackwood's greed. But the healing wasn't just about the land, it was about the people. The revelation of Gray Elk's involvement sent shockwaves through the community. The councilman, stripped of his position and facing potential prosecution, retreated into silence, his reputation shattered. It was a painful reckoning, a reminder that corruption could fester even within their own ranks. Corbin, still nursing a sore shoulder, found himself thrust into an unexpected role. Suwane, symbol of hope, a voice for change. He'd initially resisted the attention, uncomfortable with being lauded as a hero. He wasn't a hero. He was simply a son, searching for answers, driven by a need to honor his father's memory. Hemlock, sensing his inner turmoil, invited him to lead a ceremony, a traditional Lakota ritual to honor his father and reaffirm the tribe's connection to the land. Corbin hesitated. He wasn't a ceremonial leader, he wasn't his grandfather, but Hemlock insisted. He needed to embrace his heritage, to acknowledge his grief, to find peace, standing before a gathering of tribal members beneath a vast, star-studded sky. Corbin felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He spoke of his father, of his unwavering commitment to the tribe, of his relentless pursuit of justice. He spoke of the stolen artifacts, of the desecration of sacred grounds, and of the need to protect their heritage for future generations. He offered a prayer to the ancestors, asking for guidance and strength. He sang a song, a traditional Lakota chant his father had taught him, his voice cracking with emotion. And as he sang, he felt a connection to his father, a sense of peace he hadn't known since his disappearance. The ceremony concluded with a sunrise dance, a vibrant celebration of life and renewal. Corbin danced alongside his mother, her face radiant with a mixture of grief and pride. He saw the hope in the eyes of the children, the resilience in the faces of the elders. He realized that his father hadn't just died in vain. His sacrifice had ignited a spark, a renewed determination to protect their land, their culture, and their future. He knew the fight wasn't over. Blackwood and Vance were merely pawns in a larger game. Someone else somewhere was still searching for the heart of the awakened Tanka, still seeking to exploit its power. The phrase his father had written, Finny, protect the lineage, protect the secret, Sinny, echoed in his mind. He had to understand what that meant. He had to uncover the truth no matter the cost. Days turned into weeks. Corbin threw himself into his work, patrolling the reservation, investigating minor offenses, building trust within the community. He reread his father's journal countless times, searching for clues, piecing together the fragments of a mystery that threatened to consume him. He'd begun to study Lakota history and mythology, seeking to understand the significance of the raven and the song of the stone. He acknowledged his flaws too, in his recklessness, his tendency to isolate himself, his difficulty trusting others. He accepted that he wasn't his father, and he didn't need to be. He was Corbin Blackwood, a tribal ranger, a son, a protector. He would forge his own path, guided by his own conscience, committed to building a better future for his people. One evening, he drove to a remote overlook, a high point in the Badlands overlooking the vast, undulating landscape. The setting sun painted the canyons in shades of orange and purple, a breathtaking panorama of rugged beauty. He needed to clear his head to find a moment of peace. He checked his phone, a single text message from an unknown number. "The raven watches, they are coming, be ready." A chill ran down his spine. They, who were they? Was it a threat, a warning? He tried to trace the number, but it was untraceable, masked by layers of encryption. He stared out at the Badlands, the vast emptiness mirroring the growing sense of unease within him. He was no longer just dealing with local land disputes and artifact smuggling. He was caught in a much larger, more dangerous conflict. And he knew, with a grim certainty, that this was just the beginning. The echoes of his father's past were growing louder, signaling that a new storm was brewing on the horizon.